Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Delving into our topic of discussion for tonight, let's check out this report regarding the development and the importance of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt politically and economically, and we'll be right back.
Throughout history, Sinai has been the first and last defense line of Egypt's eastern gate. Also, Sinai has been an honorable for the Egyptian military victories. On its soil, the virtuous Egyptian blood was shed in the battles of liberation, honor and dignity to defend the homeland. After the completion of liberation on the 25th of April in 1982, the construction steps accelerated and life pulses were spread all over its cities, villages, valleys, plains and shores. There are construction and building battalions in Sinai and its surroundings. They proceed confidently to build, construct and develop in each spot of Egypt's land. Within less than 2 years, a strong foundation has been laid down to a series of national giant projects, on top of which are the new Suez Canal, the Suez Canal Corridor Development, the project of 1.5 million fadans, East Port Said, the National Project for Roads, a number of new cities, the 30th of June Corridor, the new Galila city, amongst others. A new anniversary of Sinai liberation comes whilst Egypt faces many challenges on all arenas locally and abroad, as it fights with all its strength a fierce battle against terrorism. This does not prevent it from its great battle that is of constructing, upgrading and development to reach a superior aim, which is providing a decent life for all Egyptians. The country announced that it will invest 5.23 billion Egyptian pounds in Sinai in the fiscal year 2019-20. The Planning Ministry, which directed 2.986 billion Egyptian pounds in investments to Sinai in the previous fiscal year, said that next year's investments would be general investments directed to all sectors. Egypt has been waging a war concentrated in northern Sinai against the terrorist group since 2013. North Sinai will receive 2.85 billion Egyptian pounds of investments, whilst the south will receive 2.38 billion Egyptian pounds. The investments are in the fields of education, water, agriculture, irrigation, transport, storage, real estate and construction. Also in agriculture, transport, education and other service sectors. The development plan is expected to cost 275 billion Egyptian pounds and be completed by 2022.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start talking about Sinai, Ambassador Shazly, I want to ask you about the 7th tripartite summit between the Egyptian president, the Cypriot president and the Greek prime minister. Now, what is the significance of such a meeting at this point in time when there's a lot of things going on in the region, there's a lot of things that are happening and developing in the energy sector as well? What is the significance of such a summit at this point in time?
I think the significance is that it shows the potency and the momentum of the Egyptian foreign policy and the circles that it moves in. We are moving in the African sphere, we are moving in the Arab sphere, we are moving in the Mediterranean sphere and the European sphere. So this is a very important indication, in addition to the fact that we have now a very potent economic interests in the gas fields in the eastern Mediterranean. We are also facing challenges with the provocative actions of Turkey in the Cypriot territorial water and in the Aegean Sea and in Syria and in Libya. We have also an interest, a humanitarian interest, in stemming the flow of people from North Africa and from the Arab world through the Mediterranean to Europe, with the tragedies that we see every day, boats capsizing, people drowning, We have a very important issue in the combat of terrorism. All of these, are very potent and significant factors in this tripartite meeting.
Dr. Abdul Haleem, now, Egypt, Cyprus, and Greece, they share the natural gas interests, and obviously there are a lot of political developments taking place within Syria, Turkey, the withdrawal of the U.S. Forces. Now, what are the main challenges do you think are being faced by these three main countries, Egypt, Greece, and Cyprus?
The fact that we've got more than one thing in common between, Cyprus and Greece on the one hand and Egypt on the other. The fact that this is supposed to be the 7th meeting actually in less than a couple of years. A clear testimony to the fact that we've got more than one thing in common. The first of which is the sort of safeguarding the national gas line against the threats and the sort of interference every now and again on the part of some schematic agendas on the Qatari side, as much as the sudden devilish interference on the part of Turkey as well. And it looms large, actually, at the end of the day, that being very much interested in the self-same area, safeguarding the sort of the threats and the attacks, would give us the impression that we are very much circulating within the self-same degree of interest, actually. As it is to be actually clear, the fact remains that the economic mutual interests and the sort of the mutual identification on the part of safeguarding all these border lines would come to a greater necessity. And economy, being part and part of policy, would give us, at the end of the day, a clear indication as well that we are in the self-same ditch, doing the self-same strategy, concentrating on the self-same interests between each other towards the benefit of all concerned at the end of the day. The sort of the thing that seems to be quite apparent on towards seeming because of the great deal of degree of understanding and the partnership. Not only understanding, but also that would exceed the sense of understanding to a memorandum of partnership, actually, among these three tripartite countries, actually.
Well, do you feel that the danger is real for maritime security, safeguarding the Zohr natural gas field?
Of course, because Turkey, in more than one respect, was trying every now and again to try to bombard these lines. Some illegal immigrants are to be passing over there, and some ships that are infringing upon the coastal line, actually, among these countries. And as such, actually, it seems to be quite one unified common enemy, and the sort of the agenda of defense should be actually with common consensus of opinion among all these three countries, including Egypt as well.
Yes. Well, Ambassador Shazly, now, if we start talking about our main topic of discussion for tonight, Sinai. Now, in his speech, the President, commemorating the 46th anniversary of the 6th of October war victory, now, he reiterated the importance and the dangers for the Sinai Peninsula. Now, the dangers in 1973 and before that is maybe a little bit different than the dangers right now. We all know the importance of the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, but what about the dangers? How are the dangers now different or similar to the ones we had decades ago?
The dangers change with time, and they evolve with time. In 1973, we're facing a known and defined enemy, Israel as an occupying power. Now, the world is shrinking. Nobody is far away from the theater. And you have the undefined, ubiquitous enemy of terrorism. Several factions, several ideologies. You cannot pinpoint where it is. And in addition to this unclear and undefined factor, you have the other known factors that are financing, arming, training, giving refuge, giving platforms for the media to those who are supporting terrorism. And these are regional countries and global powers. So the threat and the danger and the challenge is very strong, and we have to be very vigilant and coordinate with all other peace-loving powers, whether regionally or globally, because the threat of terrorism is not directed against a single country. Terrorism has struck all over the globe, from the United States to South America to Japan to India to every part of the world, to Australia, Europe, the Middle East, Africa. So it is the theater of war is very large. It is indeed a world war, because the theater of the war is global.
Yes.
And it has several aspects. You have the military aspect, you have the technological aspect. One of the great risks today is the cyber terrorism.
Yes.
So it needs, an international front to stand firm for the civilized world and for civilization against barbarism.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdul Haleem, Egypt has waged its war on terrorism and extremism for a few years now, and Sinai has been really a major battlefield for fighting terrorists and extremists. And when we started that process and this operation, everybody said it's not going to be over in a couple of weeks. It's a process that's going to take time. How do you assess the development of the whole process of fighting terrorism within the Sinai Peninsula in specific?
As it stands, actually, its geographical situation within a very important and very much critical, actually, position at the heart of Egypt. I mean, being exposed to the Mediterranean Sea from the north, Red Sea from the west, as much as Al-Aqaba Bay and the Suez Canal. It seems to be quite, of a pivotal importance to a greater extent on the part of international powers, on the part of other hating countries, in addition to the fact that it would play the role of, bridging the gap between the East and the West, between Africa on the one hand and Asia on the other. In addition to one main fundamental fact that seems to be quite of a great importance, which is being left for quite a long period of time, about 40 years, untrodden area, abiding place for a large number of terrorist attacks, the source of the tunnels from Gaza, vice versa, as much as the Bedouin people actually living in there, despite the fact that, part of the danger would stem from the fact that it had been left for quite a long period of time without any sort of interference on the military, armed forces, or any other intelligence services, actually. The fact will be there actually very much glaring as, the attempts on the part of the comprehensive Operation Sinai 2018 and 2019. Some, as you might have said at the very beginning, that would be very much provocative in saying that it is not that sort of a couple of days journey actually to finalize all terrorist acts. This is quite true. But side by side with this, the fact that one notable fact that you'd have to be very much considering every now and again in the process of suffocating and putting an end for terrorist acts and of draining the pockets of extremism in there, the fact that we wouldn't have to finalize it in just a couple of months or so, side by side with the sort of suffocating the pockets of terrorism that would have to develop Sinai in almost every conceivable respect. Part of the strategy of putting an end for international terrorism is to try to be very much culturally developing the ideas and the religious discourse, as much as higher educating the people, particularly the Bedouins in Da and the Sinai people, actually. The sort of the people, the sort of the figures that had been very much derelict for quite a long period of time. Sorts of figures that had been marginalized, very much, sidelined, and to a greater extent, as you remember, that till very much recent years, actually, they were forbidden from getting into the military service as much as the police academies, being what you might call third or fourth or fifth type of nationality. Now then, they are enjoying all the benefits and all, the moral ties as much as the ethical details and the simple rights of almost any single individual indigenous Egyptian citizen outside. Yes. Being able actually to get into the service of military, armed forces, participating in elections, getting into the sort of the higher education as much as abiding by certain simple rights that would seem to be quite giving us at the end of the day that they are on equal footing side by side with any other ordinary Egyptian people. I still remember, the attempt on the part of some tribal figures such as Salim al-Hirsh, one of the major sheikhs actually of one of the famous tribes in the and his own advent and attempt every now and again to try to help the Egyptian armed forces and the intelligence services actually. I still remember during the 60s when Moshe Dayan was trying to initiate and integrate what you might call, the jail of the century by trying to inhabit the Sinawi people and those Bedouins actually in the northern part of Sinai to a greater extent and to outward seeming that Salim al-Hirsh, the president of that sort of major tribe, to outward seeming would endorse and accept the sort of the invitation on the part of Moshe Dayan. And on the night of the summit, on the night of the meeting, during the press conference, internationally consummated, he was very much courageous to a greater extent, to the extent that he would publicize that we are part and parcel of the Egyptian, fabric. We are part and parcel of the high authority, actually, of the armed forces. We are no longer actually in need for your own interference by giving us the suitable chances of being, finding sort of a suitable land. Yes. This is our own homeland, and much same that's going to be in such a way for quite a long period of time. We are living side by side in peaceful means with our own Egyptian brothers.
Yes, excuse me, but Ambassador Shazly, Egypt has announced nowadays that it is increasing its investment and development within Sinai Peninsula for the year 2019-2020 by 75%. Now, before we talk about the development, which is seen as one way of countering terrorism, now, why has it been neglected for many years? Why did we only start really focusing on and giving that the attention that Sinai deserves only recently over the past few years?
I think this is a very potent question. Why? I personally can't tell you why. I have visited Sinai as a young boy in 1958. It was something like the dark side of the moon. Nothing was there. And I think this is the challenge. You will win the battle against terrorism in Sinai by urbanizing, by developing Sinai. Now, we are combating the tunnels that are coming from Gaza into Sinai by tunnels, modern tunnels. If you see some of the old movies of Egypt, I remember a movie by Fatin Hamama when she was going to Sinai, the only way was a very primitive ferry. Now you have a bridge, a modern bridge. After the war of 1973, there was the Ahmed Hilmi tunnel, and now I think there are 4 other tunnels that have been built. So we are fighting tunnels by tunnels, tunnels of darkness with tunnels of civilization. Today there is a university in Sinai. There are modern settlements with schools, hospitals, roads. This is the real challenge. What has happened in Sinai is because we allowed a vacuum and the void to be created in Sinai, which was unfortunately filled by forces of darkness. Now I think we have learned the lesson. We are civilizing and putting every aspect of modern life into Sinai, creating settlements, human settlements. One of the problems that faces Egypt is the concentration of the population in the delta and the valley. We need to diversify. I think it was only 5% of the total area of Egypt that is really populated. Now we are moving to in the western desert. We're moving in Sinai so as not to create any voids in our country.
Yes. Well, there has been, as you've mentioned, many sort of mega projects situated and located especially in Sinai. We're talking about the new Galila city, the 30th of June corridor, the expansion of the Suez Canal, the tunnels, as you've pointed out. The country is allocating £2.35 billion for the development of northern Sinai and £2.85 billion for southern Sinai. Now, are we mainly looking for development in these areas in only the tourism sector, the free trade zones, maritime transportation? What are the main sectors that would flourish in such an integral part and location as the Sinai Peninsula?
There are, the spectrum is very wide. I mean, few people speak about the agricultural potential of Sinai. You have the Arish Valley, which is a very fertile part of Sinai. You have the fisheries industry all around. It's a peninsula that is surrounded by the sea from three directions. On the north there is the Mediterranean, and then the Gulf of Suez, and then the Gulf of Aqaba. You have a large concentration of Egyptian petroleum in the Gulf of Suez and in Sinai proper. All of these, you have the tourism, the religious tourism with Mount Sinai and St. Catherine's Monastery. All of these are very promising venues for investment and for settlements and for urbanization in the peninsula.
Yes. Dr. Abdul Haleem, now the plan for the development of Sinai should be concluded by the year 2022, allocating about £275 billion for the development there. Now, at the rate that we're working on the development in Sinai, I mean, we're working on development all over the country, but what about Sinai? Are we working in a good pace? Are we working fast enough? Do you think we're going to meet the 2022 deadline? Or do you feel that maybe political developments taking place in the surrounding areas, especially in Saudi Arabia, maybe Yemen, maybe the Gulf countries, do you think that it could slow it down a bit?
I wouldn't say that, the propagation of warfare actions and some military interferences in our own adjacent countries, such as Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and that sort of thing, would detract our own wares from the process of developing Sinai, so much so that it would seem to be finalized in the due course of time, I'd say. Well, I think that His Own Excellency, President Mr. Fattah Sisi, is almost every now and again harping on and on, actually, when Minister Kamil Wazir, was harping him and pushing him into the process of almost finalizing all schematic progressive aspects and all the, the plans in the due course of time, if not a bit earlier. And this is a clear testimony to one major, also fundamental fact that we are, working with a great deal of fast steps that would finalize it in the due course of time, particularly, as you might have said, actually, that the strategic importance, the geopolitical interest, as much as the great deal of importance that would surround Sinai, here, there, and everywhere, would necessitate the fact that we would have to be very much concentrating on Sinai much more than any other adjacent area in the territories of the Egyptian land. The fact also will stem from another main important point, that is, apart from the geographical interest, the religious details, actually, as His Own Excellency, our dear Ambassador Shazly said, that the monasteries and the religious interests, as much as the visitors and touristic point of view, the sort of the journey of the sacred family, that's Jesus Christ side by side with his own mother, the interest of almost all the Christians from all over the world to come at particular time, actually, to visit these monasteries and churches and chapels. In the due course of time, will give us another clear, important fact of how important the sort of the situation will be, particularly finalizing the whole interests side by side with political agenda, and much the same way the most important topic that would confront us every now and again, which is suffocating the terrorist actions in the due course of time. Now then, we are in a peace process with Israel. And much the same way that Jordan is very much bound with Wadi Araba, peace process as well. So we're working within certain limits, actually. But I would really insist on the fact that side by side with suffocating the packets of aggression and terrorism in Sinai, I think that the sense of protracting all these suffocations and putting an end for all these actions is going side by side with a process of developing it. Once we finalize the whole situation, as soon as possible, actually, we wouldn't have any justification for being in that. That's why I think that the process of protracting and prolonging the sense of putting an end for terrorism in general is being intentionally prolonged side by side with establishing other agendas of highly educating people, of civilizing their own minds, of highly educating the sense of social solidarity, as much as bringing them together, as much as to be very much located within that sort of spot that had been untrodden for quite, as I've just said, a long period of time, I'd say.
Well, Your Excellency, you've mentioned earlier that in 1973 we knew exactly who the enemy was, and nowadays it's not really clear, or it's a bit distributed, maybe. There are quite a few. Who would you say would be the real face of the enemy if we could pick one or two? Who should we actually focus our attention to stop any sort of sabotage that would take place in Sinai?
I think the direction where we should focus our effort is the human mind. Terrorism breeds in human minds. If you have people with distorted ideologies who negate completely other opinions or other ideologies, this is the breeding ground for terrorism. Anybody who carries arms against civilians, who destroys property, should be faced very sternly with force. But then this, I don't think, is enough. We have a major battle for absorbing human minds, especially in the younger generations who are duped and brainwashed by propaganda, by negative talk. I think here the educational system has a very strong role to play. The media has a very strong role to play. The religious institutions have a very strong role to play. This is a battle where human minds are the objective. I think if we are victorious in this battle, I think the war against terrorism will end in our favor.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdul Haleem, now, as Ambassador Shazly mentioned, maybe it is the human mind is the real enemy, and it's a process of educating them, letting them know their own heritage, eliminating all the extremist ideas, the rumors, the false information. Now, some people say that this is a process that would take a generation at least, and it would take many, many years. so it wouldn't work, it wouldn't be as a fast sort of result-based process. And other people are saying, well, no, now we're living in a very high-tech, advanced world when you can actually change your mind and really either spread rumors or falsify the rumors or whatever. So it could be a speedy process. Which do you think? Do you think that changing the people's mindset, changing the people's culture, their information about a certain place or a certain importance for a place is a speedy one or a slow one?
Well, I wouldn't say neither being speedy or even a bit slow, in the sense that perhaps the most arduous task that would confront social reformers and presidents as much as, educators in general, is to try to shape and reshape, re-edit and reconstruct and re-edit the soul of the human mind. But as it stands, the circumstances around us, every now and again, from here and there, would necessitate the fact that we would have to be in a hurry, we would have to be very much aware of the previous axiom, actually, the word that had been for quite a long period of time, a little village. Now then, it's a little global word that seems to be quite very much simultaneous in almost all the respects and all the details. A couple of days ago, when I was talking with all my students today in a lecture in the early morning about, the very interesting film, The Tunnel, Al-Mamar, and the sort of the very much chauvinistic and nationalistic impact that it would leave, particularly for the younger generations, actually, those who are around 18, 20, 21, 26, who are quite passing through what you might call a transitional period of time, that they never did witness the sort of the October War, with its own, glorious facts and the pleasure of its own triumphant details, in much the same way that they would seem to be quite being born within a sort of a world that's changing fast, a sort of a transitional period that would impact their own minds in almost every conceivable respect. And as such, they would have to be rehabilitated and re-invoked by something chauvinistic, the sort of the thing that we really find in that sort of film. That's why I was inviting my own students every now and again to try to rewrite something about it, to give in a sort of a commentary on it, of re-evocating the sort of the chauvinistic spirit. That's what we really need. So in addition to the attempt to re-change and re-edit the sort of the mind in such a way as to be very much aware of the world around us, of the threatening voice that besiege our own world, as much as being quite highly educated in the sort of the real enemy, actually, that does exist into the inside, ourselves, as much as His Own Excellency Ambassador Shazly said, our minds would have to be quite aware of the besieging efforts on the part of the presidential authority, on the part of the mass media, actually, of trying to get benefit of almost all the details that would learn us something highly moral, highly ethical at the end of the day, the sort of the thing that maybe finding in the sort of tunnel film.
Yes. Well, Ambassador Shazly, now you've also earlier mentioned it was the big issue of the tunnels between Sinai and Gaza, which takes us to the issue of the Palestinian file, the Palestinian-Israeli process. How far are we in actually seeing some sort of a resolution or a result, or at least a good development in the right direction to solving the Palestinian issue and putting an end to any of these tunnels and extremism?
I think the issue has been addressed by Egypt since President Sadat went to the Knesset and offered peace to the Israelis. After that, the Jordanians took a step. After that, the whole Arabs, with the Saudi proposal for a comprehensive peace treaty. The intransigence is on the Israeli side, encouraged, unfortunately, by the United States. The drastic steps that are against international legality and against international law and against the resolutions of the Security Council of the United Nations, like moving the United States Embassy to Jerusalem, like recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, recognizing the sovereignty of Israel on the Golan Heights, the continuation of the process of building the settlements in the occupied territory. I think I do not look optimistically to the future, with also what really accentuates the problem further is the disorientation and the disarray of the Arab front, the instability of several major Arab countries in Iraq, in Syria, Libya, all of this, the recent Israeli election were between two hawks. You were trying to choose between the lesser evil, and I don't think there is a lesser evil. So, I mean, I personally am not optimistic to at least to the near future.
Yes. Well, Dr. Abdul Haleem, do you feel that what's happening in Saudi Arabia with and Yemen, the Houthi rebels, the involvement of Iran, do you think this constitutes any sort of danger on the eastern side of Egypt, on the Sinai Peninsula?
I wouldn't say so. We've got our own fixed personality, our own individualized identity. We've got our own decision to be taken by our own internal voices as much as our own distinguished authorities and the presidential authority as well. I wouldn't say that all these countries that you have mentioned right now would detract the suit of the worst of the existence of Egypt at the heart of the Middle East as a sovereign country, as a super advanced one, and taking the decisions. It's a sort of decision taken on the part of our own presidential authority that would enforce, actually, on all adjacent countries, not only Arab ones, actually, but I would say the European world as well. We've got our own dignity. And I think during the Security Council, the UN Security Council, a couple of weeks ago, you know, I mean, Donald Trump himself was quite praising and singing the praise of Mr. Fattah al-Sisi as being a very dignified, great, honorable man. This is the second time, actually, the 47 and 48 meeting, actually, would insist in saying so, and of describing him in such a way. Actually, words wouldn't change. And this is a clear testimony to the fact that even on an international arena, you know, I mean, in the Oval Office, the decision taken about the Egyptian solidarity and the suit of the sovereignty as being stemming out of the most powerful titanic man in the world would give us a clear indication to the fact that the Arab countries wouldn't, in any conceivable respect, leave any sort of negative impact on the decision taken. I think that they would follow our own heels, and whatever being initiated and inaugurated and taken into account in here and to the inside of Egypt will be reflected on the outside of it. I mean, the adjacent Arab countries that you have mentioned.
Yes. Your Excellency, now the plan for the development of Sinai ends at 2022. Realistically, how do you feel by 2022 we're going to see Sinai?
First of all, let me object to the fact that the development of Sinai will end in 2022. Development does not end.
It's an ongoing process.
If you stop, you stagnate. So I hope to see development that 2022 will not be the end point, but will be a starting point for a continuous development. As I have said before, what has been achieved in Sinai is very encouraging. Sinai that was connected to mainland Egypt by a primitive ferry is connected by several tunnels. Let me remind you that in 1973, the siege of the Third Army was because there was one road. Once you cut this road,
that was it.
That was it. Now this is not the case. You have several other connections. You have a population in Sinai
Yes.
that will stand against any aggression.
Yes.
We are building a community that will resist being attracted by negative ideas, because you are giving occupations, work, education. You are fortifying the human being.
Yes, yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, definitely there is a long road for the development of Sinai, but thankfully we've already started. And as Ambassador Shazly mentioned, it doesn't end in 2022. It's an ongoing process. And on this hopeful note, unfortunately, we come to the end of this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank our very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Haleem, the political analyst. I'd also like to thank His Excellency Ambassador Mohammed Shazly, member of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on our International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.